You watched porn instead of having sex with a real partner. You played video games instead of embarking on your life's adventure. You watched romantic comedies instead of having a true love story of your own. You ate junk food and grew fat and sluggish instead of living in a healthy body like you were supposed to. You keep breaking the law of pleasure, and the universe continues to punish you for it. What is the law of pleasure? Listen carefully, and I'll tell you the secret. This secret you know, yet pretend not to know. A secret you once discovered but have since forgotten. Let me remind you, instant, strong, powerful pleasure is available to you at any time. Right now, you can take it without effort, without work. As modern humans, we have created all kinds of artificial forms of pleasure that can be grabbed whenever you like. Yet on the back end of instant pleasure is always a proportional level of suffering every single time, with no exceptions. The strength of the instant pleasure you greedily grab is directly proportional to the suffering you experience on the back end. When you enjoy the momentary pleasure of eating junk food, the instant mouth pleasure is available for you at any moment of the day. Yet on the back end of eating junk food comes a feeling of lethargy and sluggishness. And what's on the back end for those who grab this form of instant pleasure routinely throughout their lives? The frustration of a life lived in an unattractive body and the regret of the health issues that may come their way. When you grab pleasure before it has been earned, the universe will punish you. This is the law of pleasure. You grab for the instant pleasure of watching porn. Yet on the back end, you lose the will and motivation to put in the work needed to have sex with a real partner. For men, on the back end of a lifetime of frequent porn consumption is an unsatisfying sex life. When you grab instant pleasure in the form of porn, as the law of pleasure always dictates, the suffering on the back end is greater than the pleasure experienced on the front end. When you grab pleasure before it has been earned, the universe will punish you. When you drink alcohol, you feel carefree and confident, yet on the back end, you must suffer through the hangover. When you grab pleasure by gossiping about others, you can feel yourself higher and better than others. Yet on the back end, it demeans your character. When you inject yourself with heroin, you may experience such powerful pleasure that you feel as though you've been taken to heaven itself. Yet on the back end is a proportional level of suffering that will make you feel as though you've dropped right down into hell. As the law of pleasure dictates, when pleasure is grabbed before it has been earned, the level of pleasure on the front end is always followed by a proportionate level of suffering on the back end. The law of pleasure cannot be cheated, cannot be hacked, it cannot be broken, it cannot be bypassed. You think you can hack it with all of your modern technology, that you can grab instant pleasure whenever you want and suffer no repercussions on the back end. You think that as a modern human, you're somehow above the law. You're not. And no piece of technology could ever be invented that can bypass it or hack it. After all, no matter which artificial method is used to induce pleasurable chemicals inside the brain must always correct itself afterwards, meaning the brain must then fill with unpleasurable chemicals. It is an absolute law of nature that cannot be bent or broken, and everybody who tries to bend it eventually discovers they cannot. If you wanted pleasure, you could have followed the proper processes. If you wanted sex, you could have gone through each step of the natural courtship process between men and women. If you wanted romance, you could have taken the leap of faith to ask out your crush. If you wanted to enjoy good food, you could have waited until you were hungry, then bitten into the natural food the world provides and experienced the full range of flavors it has to offer. Your tongue's taste buds, not numbed by the artificial sweetness of junk food. You could have been patient. You could have followed the proper processes. You could have stayed in the center of the circle and held faith that life would deliver pleasure. Instead, you made a deal with the devil. You ask of him, "Give me pleasure now without the effort." He gives it to you, yet on the back end, there is always pain. Get instant pleasure now without earning it, without going through the proper processes, without following the natural laws of nature, and there will always be suffering on the back end. And when enough people grab for instant pleasure, when enough people make deals with the devil, the world begins to rot. When leaders fall for corruption, when they accept money from businesses instead of taking care of the people, when they use that money to pay for expensive prostitutes or escorts, or for drugs, or for vacations in expensive places, their country suffers. When enough people grab for pleasure instead of following the proper processes, there are no serious, disciplined people left to run the nation in a responsible manner. Yet the law of pleasure allows every single one of us to experience pleasure beyond anything instant artificial pleasure could ever give us. The law of pleasure is generous, but you must follow its rule. If you follow the proper processes, you can take the main path laid before you. If you stay in the center of the circle and trust the flow of life, if you earn your pleasure the proper way, pleasure will be given without suffering attached to the back end. When you do not watch porn, and instead allow your sexual energy to build inside your body, then use that energy to meet a partner in the real world, face to face, with eye contact and connection, you'll experience the pleasure of sex without any suffering. When you do not play video games excessively, and instead allow your desire for excitement and adventure to take you out into the real world, you'll receive pleasure without suffering attached to the back end. When you do not eat junk food, but choose the correct food, you can enjoy the pleasure of eating nourishing, flavorful food without the frustration and despair of living your life in an unhealthy and unattractive body. Pleasure is waiting for you, but you must stop trying to reach out and grab it before it's due. Stop picking the fruit before it's ripe. Have patience, and it will taste so much sweeter. If you do the right things, the future will bring you pleasure. You think you can hack, bypass, bend or break the law of pleasure? I don't think it can be done. It is a law of the universe. All living creatures must earn their pleasure, and if the pleasure is not earned as it should be, it will be followed by a proportional level of suffering. Live the rest of your life following the law, and you will be given more pleasure than you ever could by trying to break it. This is the law of pleasure.